and to speak about my session. And thanks for everyone joining the session today. And without further delay, let's go for. So for people that they don't know me, I just give a quick introduction about myself. So my name is Mohamed Radwan. I'm a principal cloud DevOps consultant with around 17 years of experience working in the field. So I started back in 2002 as a classic ACP developer before the .NET. And I moved to different role and position, working with different tools and technologies. For example, I worked with Sybase, Power Builder, SQL Server 7, Java, .NET, JavaScript, and I relocated for several countries, eventually in the UK, London-based. And for the last 8 years, I focused on consultancy-based role, moving from the development role to consultancy-based role, where I helped more than 50 enterprise customers, some of them from the Fortune 500. Part of the community, I offer many guides, framework, command line tools, automation tools, which is published on GitHub and Azure DevOps Marketplace. So I got the chance and I deliver many sessions in many events around the globe. And I got the chance and the opportunity to, work in different project size, company size. So I think I got a chance, to have a different culture, which gave me, like some idea that there is always many ways to do everything. I like to share my experience. This is exactly as Raz explained. I have a YouTube channel with hundreds of videos and blog, which I'm sure you will find many of them useful to you. And this is some links about me. And again, if you just Google my name, you will have everything about me. Okay, I like to start with some quote, to just give you some of my philosophy about what I'm doing. So, reading 1,000 book about how to drive a car will never make you a driver. So nothing can beat experience. I'm trying to emphasize here about that, the more that experiment you run, the box is really very important, and I'm not trying here to say it is not, but what I'm trying to say here is it is not enough. So the more experiment you run, it will change the way that your realization to what you read. So try to run more experiment as much as you can. Okay, so we will talk about the agendas. I will start by talking about continuous delivery principles and practices. Again, for me, I think the main idea, we can see now, like, many of the practices is implemented, people doing continuous integration, continuous deployment, not as before. I remember I have a session, which is recorded, by the way, talking about continuous integration in 2011, 9 years ago, talking about exactly, like having the continuous, integration, the unit testing, the build automation. So now we have many people really implementing, which is something really great, But again, what I can see is usually is there is some gaps around, the process and the practices and the principles. And this is exactly what I'm trying to, provide here. So the first, I will talk about the continuous delivery principles and the practices. And the very important is to understand that, the comparison between the build or the continuous integration tasks and deployment or release tasks. Because from some experience, people sometimes, get confused about that. I will tell you some of the real stories about them. And we will talk about what is the stages between build and deployment, which is, again, I can see many people embracing that. And also we'll talk about the full stage stack of CI and CD. And then, talking about promoting the environment. And after that, we will take an overview about what is the end-to-end workflow that I will show you in the demo. And then we will see the demo. And after that, I will give you some tips and tricks. And then showing you some of the real pipeline in action with a real project. And of course, explore the naming for the confidentiality. Okay, so this is one of the best book for continuous delivery by Jace Humble and David Farley. And while the book is really great, but one of the, the most important part of the book is the eight principles and 4 practices of continuous delivery. And I'm not going to cover all of them because literally I will not say even session, I will need sessions to cover each part of that. But what I will talk about today is keep everything in source control. And I will not even cover this part, as I would like to cover, because again, even this is would like more time to cover. But again, this is my core, session that one of the practice also that I will talk about building binary only once, because again, this is very important about thinking about how we building the binaries. And once here, we should really consider that. Okay, so keeping everything is in source control. Again, this statement, while it's yes, we would like to keep everything, and there is some, by the way, there is some practices, like for example, you don't keep the generated file, you don't keep the binary files, you don't. So it is not like you should do that without considering everything. The main idea is we need to understand these principles very well, and this principle completely changed the way that we treat our, continuous delivery, not only the pipeline, but the way that moving forward for that. For example, we saw that the infrastructure as code, the configuration as code, we saw also documentation as code. If you can see, for example, Microsoft using Markdown under source control on GitHub. So all Microsoft Docs is just a Markdown under GitHub, and they just have a pipeline which deploys the documentation from GitHub to a website that can display, as you can see. So even we treat the documentation as code as well. And one of course, what we're talking about is pipelines as code. I still remember I worked with Azure DevOps since the beta version in 2005, and I was part of the early preview and the private preview in 2012. And I still remember many features we asked as a community about the feature in the pipeline. We need the versioning, we need, and now, we got the pipeline as a code using the YAML. So this is a great feature to keep, again, it is not just for, having the pipelines, the code and source control. It's all about implementing the practices, because once we have the practices, like, just imagine that you have your application and source control, you have everything, but when you treat your process, it doesn't have, for example, it doesn't have the principles that you implemented for your application. So what I would like to implement is to have these practices in my application as well. For example, I need to have my pipeline as code. I need to deploy that. I need to have a unit testing even for the pipeline. So, you treat your infrastructure the same way, or your DevOps infrastructure the same way as you treat your application. Okay, so build binary only once. This is very important, because there is some cases people just, build and deploy. But the main idea, this is not the way. You should only build binary once and then deploy multiples. So when you promote the package from one environment to another, you should not just building two and then deploy that. And again, even talking about these practices, it requires a lot of conversation and discussion around, for example, how you can do the build binary once if you have a branch and merge strategy like GitFlow, for example. So there is a lot of discussion around that, and I'm not going to discuss that. What I'm trying to tell you, the practices is all about build binary once and deploy multiple. And this changing the way that we doing the application. So for example, we saw that now we have the NuGet packages, we have the npm, we have Azure Artifacts, for example, as a storage. We have Nexus. We have something like Artifactory, and even Azure Container Registry. Some of that, because the same as for Docker image or even Docker Hub to store your Docker image with your application on the Docker Hub, and even many more. So the main idea with embracing these practices, it changed the way that we, having to implement the complete pipeline. Okay, let's talk about the build task. Again, what I'm trying, and please, if you have any question, I prefer that you just, speak to it, because I will not be able to monitor the chat while I'm presenting. So build a task. Again, the first, why I'm trying to here make this comparison or emphasize on the difference between CI and CD. Because again, I have seen some confusion about that. People sometimes including some tasks in the build, which or the CI, which is should not be part of the CI, and the vice versa for the deployment and so on. So we need to really, very well understanding about that. For example, the first task usually in the build is the compiling your application. And this compiling is all about, again, maybe you are not doing an application that compile. It's all about transforming your development artifacts into a deployment artifacts. And when you develop the artifacts, either no matter what is the code. This is why when I explain these tasks, I'm not talking about specific language or a specific tool or platform. I'm talking about the principle and the practices. So the main idea of the compiling is transforming one form from the development needed to the environment form, which is not needed by the developer. For example, bundle and minification for JavaScript and CSS and so on. So you're just minifying the JavaScript because, again, in the development on your machine, you need to have that so you can work on that. But when you deploy that to either a dev environment or testing or pre-production, you just, it doesn't, it is not important to have the same. And even for bundle and minification, this will reduce the size and so on. So it's all about transforming, again, the development artifacts into an environment artifacts. You can also version the application, run code unit testing or UI unit testing. And this is very important. When you run the code, the unit testing, it's very important to understand that unit test should run in minutes, in seconds, in minutes. I remember one of the slides that, talking about Azure DevOps, Microsoft run about 60,000 unit tests. Maybe I should add this slide, maybe next in my next session. Microsoft Azure DevOps run around 60,000 unit tests in around 25 minutes, something like that. So, the unit test should run all the time, is a fast run, and usually it's running in memory and so on. Also, you can run the UI unit test. And again, when I'm talking about the UI unit test, which testing the functionality of the usability, not testing the functionality of the application. And this is very important, Again, I'm not talking about the unit test that goes through all the application. Like, for example, if you develop a web app, and this web app is just accessing, the API, and behind the scene, the API accessing the application layer or the database and so on. This is not the UI test I'm talking about. When I'm talking about UI unit testing or UI, I'm talking about testing the usability. You want to test to make sure that you have the acceptance criteria for usability, and you can test that with isolation of the other layers. So it's all about running fast, that fast test that can run in seconds, in minutes, and it isolated from all the layer of the application. Calculate the code coverage, for example, so you start getting, the quality of your code. Run code analysis, for example, measure technical debt or code smells using any, for example, Sonar Cloud, Sonar Cube, whatever, Microsoft code analysis, whatever the tool. Calculate run code metrics, psychometric metrics, depths of inheritance, no matter what is the, the quality tools and practices you implement. You can also create the documentation for your application part of the build. Package the artifact. Again, this is very important, as we explained. So once you complete the environment artifact, you start organizing them into package, so you can easily distribute this package or store them. And this is why the last step in the CI is storing the package in the repository. And again, this is usually the last step of the CI. You complete everything, you boxing your application, and then just store the application in the storage. When we look in the CD, on the other side, it starts usually by spinning or provision the environment, and then configure the environment for the desired states. Then deploying the package, pick the package from the storage, and then deploying the application. Then install the package on the environment. Then start to configure the package on the environment, create testing data, maybe run integration testing, acceptance testing, operation testing if needed, maybe roll back if needed, if it is failed. Promote deployment to next environment. You can also move database from production to reproduction after, for example, move from production to pre-production after sanitizer or sanitizing the personal and the, the according to the compliance. You can't have the client or the customer data, for example, in production, because in many cases with many projects we would like to have a testing in, in a similar a real production data. You can also send some emails, send this SMS and so on. So this is, again, and the main idea, again, as I explained, I'm trying to put a comparison here to make sure to define that, because in many cases, I remember one of the project, some of the client asked me, we need to run a complete automated UI testing, an integration testing suite with the build. And of course, this makes the build, is like again, it's time consuming to have that. So, but again, this was very enough for them. And again, for me, usually I give my advice, but I let the solution for, the decision, of course, for the client or the customers. So, but again, this is not the best scenario to run the integration test. Okay, so this is the stages between the build. Again, you code your application, build and unit test, and then package, provision the environment, and deploying the application. Again, this is the old scenarios. Now, it's the most important part is to remember that there is a storage step, and you should store your application in the storage. Once you store that, you don't build every time. If you want to promote to the next environment, then you don't build again. You just pick the package from the storage, the same package, which is built once, and then deploy that package to the QA, deploy that package, promote. I will prefer to use promote the package, because deploy, promote is much better that, it is the same, the same package. And then of course, run either automation test and so on. So when we look at the full stacks of the CD, of course, it starts with provisioning the environment, configure the environment with the desired state, and then deploy the application, configure the application, create test data, or maybe moving some, pre-production data after sanitizing or something like that, and then automating test, manual test, and then again, waiting for the notifying the approvals and the approval stage. And this is a complete CD. You can have part of that or the full stack. It's up on the use cases and the scenario for your business. And when you promote your package from one environment, you need to remember all the time, when you are in the dev environment, this is where you have what we call, this is your development environment. And you just promote the package to the next environment where it has the feature test. And in this environment, usually, you don't have an integration test. It's all the focus on the feature test to make sure that, this feature is complete. And then once this happens, you promote that to the next stage, which is the end-to-end or the functionality or integration test. And in this environment, usually, you test the integration between other completed features or user stories or product backlog items. Once this complete, you deploy that to the pre-production where it has it has enough data in the pre-production when it's very close to the real or the production environment, so you can have more trust about that. And then, of course, once this complete, then you promote that to the production. Also, talking about the sign in and the sign off process between promote and in and out from an environment. So when you, for example, you want to promote the application or the package to be deployed to an application to the next environment, you need to sign in. Again, this is not all the scenarios, but in some scenarios you need to sign in. So what does the sign in mean? It means that you accept this release to be deployed in this environment. It means also that you accept that this release or this package has the minimum definition of done to accept this release. It means that you accept to work on this release, and once you sign in, this means that this approval will, making the package to be, automatically deployed to this environment. And then during or after the deployment, then the working start, it could be some most of them automated, and some very small manual steps for just small verification, no matter what it is. But at the end, there is a work happen in this environment, and after that there is a sign off for this environment. And this sign off is all about approving that this package is complete all the definition of done to approve this package or this release. And then so you just stamp this, and then next stage is ready and secure. Part of also of your promoting your environment, you can also scan your target environment for security vulnerability. And again, I talk with Raz that I can, or like talking about how to implement secure DevOps within the complete end-to-end life cycle in the DevOps. And one of them is the ability or the practices of scanning the desired environment before promoting my package to that environment, because I want to make sure that the environment is secure before deploying my package or promoting my package. But again, it's always based on the definition of done for in and the definition of done for out. So once you sign off, which means that everything is complete, this will promote the package to the pre-production and so on. And usually the time between sign in and sign off, this is what we call the BVT, or build verification time, which is, if you attend any of my previous sessions talking about, this is one of the very important measurement of measuring the performance of the DevOps in your organization, or your adoption for the DevOps. Okay, end-to-end workflow. I will talk again. I will start the demo by creating some resources. And this resources is just a web application with a service plan. It's a PaaS solution, or platform as a service, and a SQL also PaaS solutions, and with some configuration for the firewall between the web app and the SQL. Of course, this environment, or this this environment could be part of the pipeline which is provisioning the environment. But I didn't want to complicate the pipeline, because I wanted to make it more simpler to you, so you understand that. So I will create this manual, but again, always remember that this always can be part of the CD, which is provision the environment. And then after that, I will just go to create a pipeline on the Azure DevOps project. And this pipeline, I will choose the YAML type, which is, again, I saw great session, by the way, by great speaker today, which is something really was really impressive. And many of them talk about the YAML pipeline and how it's. So again, yes, it's exactly the same. But here, just to create a YAML file and store that, which including all your pipeline tasks. And once I have that, and then I will kick the build, which will, and this is very important. Again, if you remember the task of the build, which is compile the application, run the unit test, all the tasks for scanning the code quality, creating documentation, all of that, you can put all the quality gates that you want. And then at the end, what I'm talking is creating the package. This is the pre-step. Packaging the application is very important step in the practices. And once that happens, then storing the package in the artifact repository. And again, there is many artifacts. In our example, I will use Azure DevOps artifacts, which is part of the DevOps, the Azure DevOps. And this is the last step in the CI. Once this happens, we will run the CD. And as this is the last steps in the CD, the first step in the CD is to pick up that from the storage, download that package on the build agent, because again, it doesn't like just to push the package directly from the storage to the Azure cloud. For example, the build agent require to download the package first. This is why some of, maybe this is out of out of the scope, but just to give you, this is why some people ask me, why are we using Azure pipeline, hosting agent, VS, self-hosted. It's all about the performance of your build. So if your package is a small package, then the security, the compliance about that. So yes. So anyway, so the Azure pipeline just start downloading the package on the build machine, and then after that it push the package to the web application, and then we can then browse to the application. So let me show you that the demo. So this is the web application I will use, which is again an open source project, exists on the GitHub. So if I navigate to the GitHub, this is the Parse Unlimited, and you can see on the GitHub at ASP.NET 5, it supports Linux, which can run and using Visual Studio to build. And this is a demo generator project for Azure DevOps. And if you don't know, the Azure DevOps demo generator is an open source now tool that can use to generate artifacts on the project for demo or training purpose. So once it has many templates with existing work items, projects, and many things. And it's not just it's not just a free, but it's also open source now. So for example, if you want to know how to generate items in the same way, you can go for the GitHub for this source. Anyway, so you just need to sign for the demo generator. And here I will choose the organization, which is Azure DevOps Session. And here, as you can see, there is many template, and I will choose Parse Unlimited. And then here I will name the project. So here, Parse Unlimited project. Then click create. This will create all the artifacts. As you can see, created 2 teams, swim lanes on the board, and of course the source code, the pipeline, work items, and so on. So now it's completed. So let's now navigate to the project. If I refresh, we can see now the Parse Unlimited project created, include all the artifacts. So for example, as you can see, I have 171 work items created, 2 pull requests, 116 commits for the code, so you have all the full history of the project. So now I go for the repo. I just show you a quick overview about the project. This is the Parse Unlimited, as you can see. This is the documentation of the project if you want to get more information about the project and the configuration of the project. And then this is the actual application. Just to give you a quick overview, let's close that. And this is the testing. It includes unit testing and functional testing. And again, this could be very useful for you to try the build and deployment using unit testing, automation, UI testing, and integration testing in your lab environment. And this is, of course, for the unit test. And this is the pipeline. This is the end-to-end. So I will just pause that because I don't want to use it. I will create a new one. And now let's go here first. As I explained in the workflow, I will create the environment and I will provision this environment manually, not part of the CD, to simplify the process. So here there is a template exists on the marketplace called the WebSQL, which, as expected, it has app services, web app, and a SQL Server database. And then here I will just name the app name and click create new database, naming my database server. And here also the actual database. This is the server name. The previous was the database name. And here the username and the password. And for the last part, this is just the location for. And of course, for the last part, allow Azure services. This is for to open a port between the web app and the SQL, the POS solution, so the web app can communicate with the SQL. And just select and just click create. It will just take few minutes and it will be created. Now it's completed because I record that. So if I navigate now to the resource group, we can see now the resource group here, web app, SQL Radwan, and it has here the SQL database and the SQL server, the app services. It also include application and site. We don't need it. And here, this is the web SQL server. And if I navigate also, we can see here, this is the web app. And inside the web app, we can see this is the configuration of the web app. So this is the default configuration created. And here, this is the username and password of the database that I created during the provisioning this template from the UI in the Azure portal. Okay, now I have my environment. So let's get back and create a new pipeline. So as you can see, I will create a pipeline and it will ask me where I want to store it. And before that, as you can see, I just remember this is a classic editor. And because I will create a YAML, then I will choose where I want to store. And here, this is a predefined YAML template. So it's based on the application. And since my application is ASP.NET, I will choose this YAML template, which generate all what you can see now. And since my application require Visual Studio 2017, then I need to change the image of the build agent to have that. To show you here, I just show you here, I need Visual Studio 2017, so I need this image. So I will just change that image. And now I will just save my application, save the YAML file. And then I will run now. So this again, if you remember, this will run the CI, which is again, building the application, run the unit test, all the steps that we explained. So I can just open both of them. So you can see the build task from inside and from outside. So this is from outside, or this is from inside now, and this is from outside. So you can see the experience for people that they don't have. Okay, so as you can see now, let's start making the new get back command, now building the app. This is from the outside. It doesn't show the details of the tasks. And here it will start now compiling the app. Now running the unit test. And now to complete. As you can see, I have 100% test passed. This is a unit test. We can also open the unit test from the test tab here. Okay, so as you can see now, this is the default template, which doesn't include to store the package on the Azure artifacts. So Azure Devops artifacts. So what I'm doing is I will just add a new task. The first here, I will just add a new stage because this application is just for building. So now I will add another stage which will deploying the application before adding the task. So as you can see here, I just added a new stage. So this will be the build stage, and I just need to just copy that. So I will choose everything here, and I just click two tabs to make to indent, which give this part under this section, which is this stage. So as you can see now, I have the stage build. This will be for the CI. And I will copy all this stage so I can make a multi-stage YAML build. So now I have another stage. I will change the name from build to be deploy. The same here. And I don't need all these tasks or the steps, either the variables. So I will just delete all the steps and I just start adding new steps. So the first steps, if you remember in the CD, is to deploy, to download or pick up the package, so it can, it can deploy that. But before that, I need to authorize the build and Azure DevOps to my Azure subscription, and this is just by giving this authorization. Of course, this is happen in the lab environment. We don't do that in reality. And this is the web app SQL, the name of my resource group. And here I put a task. As you can see, web deployment. And the next step is I will choose a publish task. This is a task that I need to put it in the build so it can publish the artifact or push the artifact or the package to the Azure DevOps artifacts. And here is the steps I will put to download the package, which is download artifacts. And here, this is the name of the drop location. It's based on the name of the store. So now, as you can see, this is the steps now. And to make sure that it's correct, I just need to make sure that I can collapse both of them. Yes, this is the build stage and this is the deployment stage. And just to be careful about the indent, and because if you just have one space wrong, of course, it will be a problem. And then I just save this application, save the YAML file. Then go to the pipeline. Of course, it just need authorized the resource because this is an hosted agent, not self-hosted. So I need to authorize that on the runtime. And as you can see now, it starts building the application, the first stage, which is the build, which include all the previous tasks we talked about. And then once this complete, it will go for the deployment stage. Just let me run this quickly. Run the unit test, build still build, no unit test. And now it will move. Now it's complete the build and moving to the next stage. Now the deploy is running. If you remember, it starts downloading the package from the Azure DevOps artifacts. After downloading the package, start deploying the package to the web app. So the first step here, download the build artifacts and then pushing the package to the web app on Azure. Now it's pushed. So it's complete now. And let's navigate to open the repo just to show you here. I just need to copy the connection string name from the web config JSON. The connection string name is the default connection string, but the template created has a different name, so I will change that. And again, all of that can be completely automated, just to simplify that. So I went for the configuration and the connection string, change the connection string name to be default connection string. Just save that. So now my application deployed and everything fine. I just browse the application. and I can see the application loaded with the data from the database and everything. So this is for the demo. Let me get back to some of the steps using YAML template. So as you saw in the demo, I used multi-stage in the same YAML template. This is, this is good when you have a very simple, stages. But if you have a complex stages and you don't want to repeat the same steps, and then in this case we're using YAML template, which means that you define the template for your deployment, and then you can have the usage. For example, as you can see here, I just use this template. So in the pipeline, I will just, reference the template, which include all the steps. And this is, of course, good for reusability. I can have reusability about the stage. I can have reusability about the stage. So, I can define many templates with different scope. So I can, reuse them in the way that it's not, force me to repeat my code, because again, repetitive means the maintainability will be difficult. So if it is repeated, then copy and paste, you need to stop that. Another tip, is managing dependencies. As you saw that I could run in parallel, stages, and by default, the stages is dependent on the order that you order them. If you want to remove the dependencies, this require that you implicitly put depend on nothing, which removes the implicit dependencies on the environment. And always remember, it's also based on the available agent and your subscription. How many agents could be available in your subscription or your self-hosted to support in parallel, stages deployment or build whenever. This is the depends on. Yes, this is for real scenario, just to show you here. This is like, as you can see, we have around 13 stages, and we can have them from promoting that from one stage to another. And this is how it's look like. We have, as you can see, we have many parallel, and we have some dependencies, like you can see here, UAT, user acceptance testing. We have OAT, or operation acceptance testing. So it's based on the environment and can run that. I think it's the same code, but we don't need it. So question and answer. That's it. Questions?
I saw you using Azure artifacts for storing the NuGet packages. I know you can use the pipeline artifacts or the build artifacts to store the packages. Which one would you recommend using where?
Actually, in my demo, I use Azure Devops build artifacts. It's not NuGet package.
Okay. There is the artifacts component in the Azure DevOps as well. Would you recommend publishing into there?
Yeah, I use that.
Okay.
So if you ask a bit about my recommendation, I usually say use whatever is available, as long as you have the process.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
Thanks again, Mohammed. Just looking at the questions, it's saying here, so the first question is, please let me know if the demo generator or similar is available for Dynamics and the Power Platform.
No, unfortunately, it's not available for Dynamics. At the end, this demo generator is generated some source code for ASP.NET, for Java. Some of them also some work items, some unit testing, some test cases, but unfortunately, it's not available for Dynamics. But at the end, it's an open source, which means that you can get a fork for that. And once, the main idea is just, again, taking some source code and then generate that. So, and by the way, it was not an open source. It was developed by a third-party company. And we internally spoke as an MVPs. We spoke with Microsoft about that. This should be a part of an open source, and they made an agreement with the third party, and then they released it an open source. I think this was 1 year ago.
Okay, there was another question about the demo generator as well, asking if it's available for on-prem DevOps, basically the
Uh,
STS.
no, it is not, but it will be the same. It just again, I will say because it's an open source, I can very easily, changing that to to change the API to do that on the Azure DevOps server. I mean, on the other side, you can, for example, you can use migration tool like work item migration. If you want to talk about the work item, you can also have like, if it's a Git repo, for example, which is all of them is a Git, because Microsoft stopped using TFSVC from long time. They consider it as a legacy. So yes, you can import the Git out of the box from Azure DevOps. What I'm saying that once you create that on Azure DevOps, the cloud, then you can import them to on your on premises if you have, of course, an access to the the internet.
So Leo is asking about some reading recommendations. He was referring to your book, the Continuous Delivery book. He's saying that it seems to be quite old. And if you think that these principles back in 2010, obviously 10 years ago, still apply to the new way of delivering DevOps, and if you could recommend any particular books, what would they be?
I think yes. I will say yes. There is some, if you're talking about software engineering, it's the same concept, like reusability, depths of inheritance. When we're talking about maintainability. So looking at this book, I consider it because again, it's not technology. This book, it's not talking about technology, it's just talking about the principle. So I believe in it's still, one of the best book recommended. But again, it's only for continuous delivery. For me, I mean, the most book I read, I think it's like this book, the same also for, the phonics project. This is also one of the really very great. For new books, you know, I didn't look at for the new books. This is just for yeah, for some of the existing books.
Yeah, I mean, look, I completely agree that fundamentally it's the principle which is about reducing waste and improving efficiency in processes. So I completely understand why you'd want to only ensure you are building once and deploying many times so that you're making maximum use of the CPU and processing power that was consumed. Is that correct?
We're looking at that from another perspective, which is like, I need to trust that this binaries, I'm not going to change it again. I don't need to change it. I mean, for example, if you build that once, and then if you every time you build, then I don't trust that what exists in this environment, it is the same on this environment, because this is a different build. Like for example, if you move from the test and then you merge, and after you merge, then you have another build and have another package, and you deploy that to this environment, which means that there is a two different version, one in this environment and one in this environment, and you try to convince me that they are both the same. So from the functionality, they could be, but but again, this is what like I would like to be the same binary, so I can trust that if the package is promoting with the same binaries, it means that it doesn't change, during the promotion from this environment to this environment. But if you just every time you merge and then after you merge you deploy to this, how can I trust that there is no error from this binary file to this binary file? So it's all
Got-
about
yeah.
the consistency and the trust of your build.
Got you. Great. So Whale is asking, would you have one pipeline to build the code and UI tests at the same time, or would you build them independently?
One pipeline to UI test. Um, Usually I say first let's agree about UI test, which is the integration test, not the usability testing, because as I explained, sometimes you may run the usability testing, which the doesn't access the API or the database behind the scene. So if I'm talking about the UI test as an integration test or an end-to-end test, the first we need to agree that this run in the deployment pipeline. It doesn't run during the CI, because this will consume time. So during the deployment is based on the use case and the scenario. This is usually, I will say, there is no right answer. It's based on your scenarios. So for example, based on your use case, the most important, for example, or the most popular use case is that you have a new build and you want to verify that the previous integration testing is not. So you provision a new environment, you deploy that, and after you complete the deploy the application, you run the unit test as a part of a post-deployment task. It's one pipeline. Yes, it usually it will be pipeline, but I'm expecting also, from the experience, you will have different scenarios and you will have a different pipelines based on your scenarios. Like, for example, I will use this scenario when I want to verify a new feature completed. I will use this pipeline when I want to have this. So just imagine that each pipeline will map to a different use cases in your business.
So we have another question. It is, I would like to know YAML, and can you advise on how to learn YAML templates for, here we go. Sorry, lost the question. It's back. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I would like to know YAML template to practice CI/CD multi-stage, and what would be your advice for someone that wants to transition to DevOps without coding knowledge?
Without coding knowledge, I mean, I prefer, this is what I usually say. You should have any coding practices, because at the end, troubleshooting the build, it required, some knowledge about, the coding. You in many cases, for example, this is why I remember one of my clients in Denmark. It was not in the UK. He doesn't use any task of the build task. He just create his own tasks. He just told me it's very easy to create the task instead of looking at that on the marketplace. So what I'm saying that I will recommend to have a basic development if you are going to work with the build and pipeline. Other ways, the troubleshooting will be very difficult. For the YAML, I think Microsoft documentation is really good for the YAML. I mean, I can send you the link of the YAML documentation. And once you start getting this knowledge, I think having this demo, what I explained to you, it's an end-to-end. I mean, you can just generate the project, create the YAML, deploy that. Once you can do that, let's try to add more tasks and learn by doing. Yeah, if you remember my quote, like, reading the book is not enough. So just to try to drive the car.
So Malapo is asking, he's saying, hi, Mohamed, is it possible to have build solutions that contain multiple projects, e.g. ASP.NET, ASP.NET Core, etc.?
You're talking multiple, one pipeline?
Have possible to have build solutions that contain multiple projects? So I guess this is slightly different question to pipelines. It's more to do with builds, solution builds in Visual Studio, I'm guessing.
Yes, but yes, we can have that, because one this is like the multi jobs. Like, with each job you define, or we with each stage and job we can define the source. And for example, this source from this project and this source from this project. So you can, yes, get this project, for example. Let's say, for example, you can build the one pipeline which including your desktop application, your mobile application, your APIs, and all of that in one pipeline which deploy that.
Okay, so we have a question from Philip, who's asking, have you set up a DevOps pipeline that uses build environments to build a managed solution based on other dependencies in third-party managed solutions, where you store the third-party managed solutions, Azure artifacts? So obviously, Philip is talking about, Dynamics 365 managed solutions here. And he's talking in particular to third-party solutions which your solutions have dependencies on. And I guess that's probably an issue that many of the partners and customers possibly also have. But yes, it's a very valid question. But I don't know if Mohammed, if that's something that you'd be keen on answering. It's very specific to Dynamics.
Yes, I had some experience with Dynamics and work with that, but yes, I'm sorry, I don't know that.
Yeah. I think we should definitely discuss that point that you've raised, Philip. So I'm going to hold on to that, and I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes once I've answered question related. The next question, which is Govi's asking, could you suggest some code coverage and code analysis tools which can be added in pipeline, open source Microsoft third-party tools?
Sonar Cloud is an open source to a certain extent. I mean, as long as your project is not that big, and also for me, usually when I got a question around recommended tools, and I try all the time to focus on the practices, not the platform. I try to be platform independent and tools independent, because at the end, the more flexible you choose your tool, because everything changes all the time, either the tool or so as much as you implement the practices, you can very easily move from this implementation to this implementation. I mean, companies now thinking about multi-cloud because they don't want to be logged in one cloud providers, and they're using frameworks so they can not be treating only one environment. The same for you using Git, for example. When you're working with Git, it means that you can move from Azure DevOps to maybe DevOps Lab, or the main idea, or maybe even Bitbucket. The main idea is keeping your platform and tools very open for what exists in the market. I'm just giving, I know that uh, this is usually because when people are asking for recommended, I just use what is available. And the most important is to keep the practices, focus on the practices, and use what is available.
Thanks. So it seems as though a Sonar Cloud is definitely the one that's popping up the most for people. So yeah, so thanks for kind of validating that. Leo is asking, he may have possibly missed it, but he says, do you have some good recommendations around using Markdown for documentation as code process?
I will say look at what exactly Microsoft is doing with Microsoft Docs. So for example, if you go for any Microsoft Docs, you will find at the end the link for GitHub source if you have a question, or you have anything, and then you will see that you will be redirect to the source of the docs. There is many things like that. So I think again there is no documentation about that. It just some of the the practices in the community and general discussion. We also have some companies, but it's confidential. They develop some extension to convert the Markdown into Word and PowerPoint. So, for example, because at the end everything in source control, we don't want to have a documentation in a Word document or in a PowerPoint, but at the same the client is still asking for, I need this as a Word document. So what they try to do is keep everything in Markdown to be under source control, either the client documentation, the architecture, the high level design, no matter what. And then this extension can convert the Markdown to be PowerPoint or Word document based on, so you can have what we call the single source of truth, which is the source control.
Yeah, great stuff. No, thanks again for all of that. It's really great to have you on, Mohamed. And could you share more details about the DevOps community that you mentioned earlier? Because I think a lot of this community that are attending today would be interested, and we're happy to share that information later in an email, as well as stay connected with you in your activities. So we'd be really happy to do that.
Sure.
So thanks again,
No problem.
Mohamed.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Great pleasure to have you. I remember meeting you, I think it was maybe over 2 years ago, I think it was, in London. and you were involved actually in Dynamics. It was actually a lot of the Dynamics and Power Platform customers you were being involved in at the time, and now obviously you're working with more for an elaborate ecosystem. But yeah, it was a great pleasure to meet you as well.
It's the same here.
And thanks for sharing your GitHub Cloud Dev Ops vision. Yeah, so please check it out.
Yeah, sure. That will be great. I'm happy to people joining, try to learn. Again, what I believe in, learn by doing is the best way to, for doing that. So yeah. Thank you
again.
so much.
Great pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
So that was Mohamed Radwan. Yes, so before